Hi, this is Keith Pegues, and welcome to the ELC Black Men's Leadership discussion on harnessing the power of vulnerable leadership. We're very fortunate to have two great panelists to explore this important and maybe controversial topic. This is going to be good and will be challenging to many of us, I'm sure. So please welcome our panelists. First, David Graff of Google, where he serves as Vice President, Global Policy and Standards. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
And our second panelist today is Damon Hart of Liberty Mutual, where he serves as Executive Vice President and Deputy Chief Legal Officer. So welcome, Damon.
Absolutely. Welcome. Thank you for having me here.
And Damon, I have to say before we start, my family, when they watch this, is going to get a kick because I'm the person who dances around the living room every day going, Liberty Bibbity to all the commercials, right? So I'm a fan of the Liberty Mutual commercials. Very creative. Okay, gentlemen. Well, thank you again for joining, and let's get to it. So, the conventional wisdom equates vulnerability with weakness. But the research and reality show something quite different. In fact, it takes strength to be vulnerable, and being vulnerable can also build one's power. Vulnerability is associated with the characteristics of effective leadership, including the courage to face hard truths, the willingness to be open to new and sometimes contradictory data, and the ability to walk towards uncertainty and risk. And I am sensing right now what might be side eyes looking back at screens and the melanin male alarm bells that may be going off at this very moment, talking about vulnerability and leadership in the same breath. However, I think it's important, and I think we need to delve into it. So during this session, David and Damon will really explore approaches and tactics that you can put into practice for Black men in professional and corporate settings, to really unlock the potential of vulnerable leadership in a way that is both authentic and empowering. So I'd like to begin really with the first question. So let's begin by exploring these leadership models. Our definitions of leadership are directly related to the leadership examples that have left a strong impression on us. And those often come from our families, our early employment experiences. So, David, what examples of effective leadership did you witness and emulate on your way to where you now are as a VP at Google?
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this topic. It is an important one, and I also understand the side eye glances that may be happening when we broach this topic. So I can think of two examples from my life, two examples of leadership attributes that really resonated with me. I think the first is from my father. So shout out to family first. My father's a doctor, and what I observed when I was younger, he used to pick me up from school and take me with him on his rounds, is just the unbelievable empathy he had for all of his patients. Each patient, he made each patient really feel like they had his undivided sole attention, that their care was incredibly important to him. And I just remember being at a young age just super impressed by that. From each room he visited. This is a little old school when, you would walk from room to room. I grew up in a small town, so this was a smaller hospital. So that struck me as a really interesting attribute of his leadership style. Second, I'd say the first CEO I worked for, I think his superpower was his unbelievable ability to listen. And I didn't know the phrase active listening at the time, but that's what he was doing. And he was a salesman by training, and probably one of the best salesmen I've ever seen. And it was primarily because he was just so good at really listening and at engaging. When he first engaged with people he didn't know, just really not saying anything his first 10 or 15 minutes, just really focused on their story. And then he was able to craft a narrative or craft a response that was incredibly powerful. So those are just, for me, there were sort of two attributes that jumped out at me when I watched people implement them. Frankly, they wouldn't have been things that I think would have naturally occurred to me until I saw them in practice.
David, thanks for sharing that. Very interesting thinking, from family to first CEO, empathy and active listening, which are both incredibly important attributes and very valuable for vulnerable leadership. So, Damon, what about you? What examples of effective leadership did you witness and emulate on your journey to an AVP at Liberty Mutual?
Yeah, thanks. I'll too start with my father. My dad worked on an assembly line for General Motors, and I think about the differences and the progression when I look at my grandfather and my father, and then me and my brothers in terms of how we are, in terms of raising our family, use empathy and listen. Love said, I think it's really important. So my father was more of the strong, silent type, right? He wore his emotions on his sleeve. So he was always telling us that he loved us and modeling that. And I look at kind of, my generation in terms of we have a much wider path to walk in terms of how we can be in our lives, in our communities, in our families. And I hope, I've got a son to pass that on to him, that, you can be vulnerable, and that's a part of your strength as well. I mean, I think strength meaning that as a man, I can do everything on my own. It's the game of life on their own, and no one leads kind of on their own. So I think the models are changing kind of generationally, and I'm glad to see that. Another person I would bring up is a mentor in my first law firm. He kind of shared his whole life with me. He shared his struggles, shared his well. Remember some of the lessons that he talked about, failures in his life, how it was hard for him to raise his daughter as a divorced father, and how all those struggles worked. But, the thing, David, I like what you said, is that he showed a lot of how to care for people you work with, your peers, all of that. And that really dispelled the myth in my head that nice guys finish last, and you got to really stab and step on people to get to the top. I just don't think that's true. And I think that what's demanded of us as leaders in this, 2021, coming out of a pandemic and everything that we went through, is just much more than, giving orders.
Yeah, Damon, that's powerful as well. And just thinking about, your dad's example and really expressing and showing emotions, which certainly is an attribute of a vulnerability, the collaborative leadership, not trying to do it alone, and caring for people, and I think you're right. What we've seen, the humanity that has come into leadership and the world of work during the pandemic, is something that I think we all can look at as a really good example. Okay, great. Thank you both, gentlemen.
One say, just to add in on that, is that if you think about what are the implications of the kind of bulletproof kind of persona that we try to project as Black men, the kind of Luke Cage, I'm going to come in, I'm a superhero, you can't kill me, I got everything figured out. Well, we don't connect as much as people. It's hard for people to see as human, and it's really hard for people to want to invest in us. And it also might cause us to not ask questions that we need to ask of our peers, of people report to above us, because we want to act like we've got it all figured out. David, does that resonate with you?
It does. And I guess I was smiling inside when you were saying it. I do think, and I know we'll get into this in some of the, I think, other topics, but this is a particular challenge for Black leaders. We have to be assertive enough in order to carve out the space that we need to do our jobs. But if we are too bulletproof, I like your phrase, and I always like a good Luke Cage reference, then we will end up not asking the right questions. We'll end up inadvertently alienating some folks that we could be instead building as allies. So I think it's a good flag.
Yeah, I agree. It is a good flag, and and I'm wondering if some of this might be the different thoughts might be generational, might also be very much driven by the unique experiences that some Black men experience that maybe others don't. And I was thinking for myself, being a former C-suite executive and thinking about the various situations and how I might have to show up a little bit differently as a Black man because some of the norms and mores didn't necessarily apply to me. They applied to others, but not to me. So which actually brings us to our second question. So let's talk about, and I'm sure many of today's attendees are thinking about this, wondering if leadership in some organizations, as we are outlining it here, is a trap for Black men, right? Because we know that historically, leadership has been equated with strength, right? And some of that may be generational, right? The great man theories of leadership, right? But some would say those models of leadership might not be effective in the 21st century. So here's the second question I'd like to pose. Beginning with you, Damon, what are some of the non-traditional forms of leadership that you have used effectively in your career or have witnessed being used effectively in corporate and professional settings?
Yeah, great question. Listening. Listening is powerful. It conveys a lot, conveys value. You learn a lot through listening. And I think particularly for me as a lawyer, it's important for me to understand my client's problems or the business issue that we're trying to solve. And so listening has been really important. I love that you talk about it in terms of context, Keith, in terms of time. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal I'm looking at right here that says, your next boss, more harmony, less authority. And it says, prize for being social, emotional experts. Future managers may spend less time in directives and more time collaborating. It says the new boss is a coach, not a dictator. And I think that's really important in business settings, into a space where, and the higher up you go in a company, the less you have mastery of all of the things that report to you, leading through other people and trusting them and establishing that trust. And I know part of the side eye that I think is legit is that, do we as Black men trust that we will be accepted as we are, and where we have to be ourselves? And I think that it's interesting. I mean, you have to be strategic about who you trust and how you trust. But overcorrecting the other way, where you don't have any of these vulnerabilities, it's kind of hard for people to see you as a full human being. It's kind of hard for people to see that you're somebody that is continuing to develop just like everybody else. You have a lot more to offer. So I think you can get single storied in one track if you only present.
Okay, great. Thanks, Damon. David, what about you? As we think about what could, on the one hand, be a trap for Black men in the corporate setting with this new form of vulnerable leadership, or maybe just share a few of those effective leadership approaches that you think have worked for you or for others that you've witnessed.
Sure, it's a great question, and you're right. There is a little bit of a trap there. So I'll say one thing that I definitely think that the leadership model is changing or evolving, and just to echo what Damon said, I know at Google and in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of conversation about what is the right effective and what is the most effective leadership model, and people are talking more about coaching and less about being the sort of and a more autocratic, dictatorial boss that I think is the model that many of us either have in our heads or at least had in our heads, at least a certain generation of us. So I definitely think the trend line is in the direction of coaches. I would just say, one thing from my personal experience, I remember when I got my first leadership position, I became the general counsel of a company that we later helped take public. And I was sort of elevated from among my peers. And so I was excited about the opportunity, but I immediately recognized, as anyone would in that situation, right, the trap that Black folks are caught in, right? And here's the trap as I saw it. I needed to definitely live the role. I mean, I had been elevated general counsel, and I needed to be seen as the general counsel, and I needed to be able to interact with people at that level of sort of authority. So I had to kind of assert myself. But if I asserted myself too strongly, of course, I could be labeled as angry, as not a team player, as territorial. And so this is the trap, right, that all Black folks understand, right, the tightrope we have to walk. I know what somewhat occurred to me, but then I implemented it, and it ended up working out well for me, is I remember taking a step back and really thinking that, and Damon's point about trust resonates with me. I remember just thinking, look, I'm just going to have to be completely sort of non-territorial in my approach. I'm just going to have to take this team and I'm going to have to go to them and say, like, hey, I want all you folks to succeed. So you know what? You get first choice about all the plum assignments. Like, you guys tell me what you want to do, where you want your areas of expertise to be, where you want to sort of show leadership, and I will back you, right? All of you folks choose first. I will choose last, in a sense. And I remember telling myself that I was really going to try hard to live that, and I was going to try to promote everyone on my team, and I was going to try to do it without being concerned that some of them were going to try to take me out behind my back because we used to be peers and they might have an eye position, and just promote them. And look, that ended up working well for me. Did every single person reciprocate, the trust that I put in them? No, right? But a majority did, and it did allow me to build allies. And there were some moments where it was hard, but I would say, I guess, going all the way back to that non-traditional leadership model, consciously putting myself second in that situation, funnily enough, with the team, really helped build allies and helped position me as a better leader. And now the benefit of hindsight and, a lot of Google speak, like, I'm sure I could wrap all that up in some pretty nice language about all the things that I was doing and empowering people. We didn't have that vocabulary at the time. It just felt like, frankly, practically, just like a nice convergence of altruism and pragmatism. It felt like that was the right thing to do in order to get the team to support me, and in order to kind of solely demonstrate that, like, I was confident enough, even if I didn't feel it, to sort of put other people first.
Yeah. So, we're here amongst other Black men, right? So we know that, Black men traditionally or historically have had their strength weaponized against them in the corporate and professional settings, and particularly sometimes when they reach, senior levels of leadership, right? So, so we're woke, right? But what would you say really are the traps that have to be avoided, and what is it that the folks in the audience should be thinking about, right, as they think about how to navigate those two worlds? Because that could be pretty tricky, right?
Folks to navigate in the corporate environment, particularly for Black men. I mean, navigating that very thin line between assertive and being labeled too angry, and sort of, keeping your head down and doing the work and trusting that you will be recognized when that doesn't always happen. So these are the twin straits you have to navigate. I would say for me, and I guess the advice I give sometimes, I think, and while this approach is not without risk, I think that we have to allow ourselves the freedom to experiment, to make mistakes, to fail, and not have that feel so world-ending. I guess said slightly differently and maybe a little too provocatively, I sometimes will joke with folks, less experienced folks at Google, and they'll say, what do I need to do? And I'll jokingly say, like, I need you to have the confidence the sort of breezy confidence in a meeting that I see a lot of mediocre white folks have, right? Always raising their hand, always volunteering for things, always saying, I have a strong opinion. And I'm in a lot of these meetings and I'm sitting there and I see all the people raise their hand and say, I think this, David, I think that. And I like it. Sometimes I think, like, I know you don't know what you're talking about because you've never thought about this issue before, but I appreciate the opinion. And maybe this is a little too real, Keith. I apologize if it is. But what I basically, I think that we, in a sense, have to give ourselves a little bit of a break to give us the same flexibility as a lot of other people are giving themselves to I hate to say lean in, but to lean in and to engage and to push themselves out there and to volunteer for stuff that they don't know that they can do. Because more often than not, that does lead to success. That does lead to good outcomes. And I know, I'll only speak for myself. Maybe this will resonate with other folks. Initially, I was reluctant to do that because I felt like if I made a mistake, right? I'm talking about my first leadership opportunity. I'm in this position. I'm a general counsel. I'm a Black general counsel. This company's going public. I'm in New York. Like, it's high profile. At least it felt like that for me. And I felt like, if I screw this up, if I make a mistake, like, it's not just me. Like, I am totally salting the earth for the people that are going to come behind me. They're never going to hire another Black person again, right? Because of this. That's a lot of weight to carry around. There is a kernel of truth to it, which makes that weight even heavier. But if you live your life that way, right? If we act like that, we hobble ourselves from the beginning. So it's super hard. Like I said, and no strategy here is without risk. All right. Because as I said, it's some of these dynamics are very real. But I guess that's the advice that I would give.
Well, David, I think that's sage advice, and I think I just underscored one of the things you said here, which I think is valuable for all of us. Giving ourselves greater flexibility. The flexibility that others afford themselves. I think we could definitely benefit from that. So Damon, what are your thoughts? What do you see as maybe some of the traps, and what would you suggest that people do to try and avoid those traps?
Yeah, I think I love what David, what you just said in terms of there is this inherent relationship between confidence and we went from a peer to a leader of a group. Takes a lot of confidence to kind of have the patience to sit back, let them choose first, and know that you're going to get yours in terms of the recognition that you deserve. I mean, it's very interesting that sometimes the thing that keeps us from being vulnerable, although we're projecting the exact opposite. So one of the things I think about a lot is these kind of two and I kind of, it helps me stay balanced. And one of them is that everybody heightened about more than me. And the other one is I have a lot to offer. Those two, and take that into every new role, every new situation. I'm going to learn from, and I'm going to bring some things that only I can bring. And so I think about that a lot in avoiding the trap, because it is a trap. I mean, the other thing, we talked about emotion. I'm a big dude. I played college basketball. I'm 6'6". I'm a big brother. If I were to come in and be what others would be called passionate about something, there would be reverberations around that. So I think about how I use emotion. I think about that. And one of the things that's important, because it has to go somewhere, is I have to have people that I can trust. Everybody's seen that old Dave Chappelle skit where the guy goes off in a board meeting and gas, that sort of thing. You don't want to do that. Vernon Franklin actually is the name of the skit if you want to look at it. But we've where you feel like going off. You can't do that, but have a squad of people that you can talk to process some of these things so that it doesn't come out in the wrong way. Show up in the boardroom, you show up the way that you want to show up, and increase brand, increases your equity and your influence within the company.
Yeah, Damon, I love that. Yeah, because 6'6" brother coming into the boardroom, with a whole lot of confidence might be like, ESPN top 10 facial slam dunk to some folks, right?
Yeah, no, so I don't walk with confidence, but I also try to walk with a measure of humility. And, I'm just mindful of like personal space. I'm not like up on somebody. The other reality is like, I like what you said, David, about just giving yourself some grace. We're all evolving. The higher you go in a company, you realize that everybody, even in the C-suite, is parts of the game. There's still, nobody is a finished product. So if you get in your head that you have to finish, that could keep you from actually growing. That growth mindset of I'm adding, I love athletes. I love the way Jordan added something new to his game every summer. Kobe did the same thing, whether it was in the box to work on his footwork or learning post moves or whatever. I'm in a big transition right now. At the end of the year, I'm going to take over as chief legal officer of Liberty Mutual. And one of the things a coach had given me that's a really good piece of advice is it's a subtle mindset shift from proving to improving. So I'm walking into rooms looking to improve, not looking to prove. And I think that that's been helpful.
Yeah, I tell you, I captured a couple of real good gems here. And our dialogue may result in some new entries into the dictionary as well. So I'm thinking about this balance, right, of confidence and humility, right? So I don't know, maybe we'll apply for a couple of new entries, right? Confamility or humilidence.
I love it.
Confamility or humilidence, right? And so that's the new combination for brothers to really lead in a way that's gonna allow us to do both, right? Be confident and also balance that with the humility, right, that it requires to be successful at this level. And I love that from proving to improving, that shuttle shift in the mindset, right? That's fantastic. We're getting real today. This is what I love about the ELC programming, keeping it real. So brothers, I and the participants appreciate your candor. So I just want to stop for a minute and say that, because sometimes we get under these sessions and at the end, we feel like, okay, that was a waste of time. I know the folks in the audience, the participants today are not feeling this way. We're keeping it real. So let's stay on the keep it real track with the next area to explore, which is vulnerability and leadership. So some would argue vulnerability does not equal weakness. So let's redefine what vulnerability means. Technically, it means the quality of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed. But a more useful definition for our discussion might be the willingness to face ambiguity or the ability to remain open to new and uncomfortable data. In other words, being semi-permeable. Right? So let's see, confamility, humilidence, and semi-permeability. Okay, we're going to create some new terms here. So seriously though, what are some more useful definitions of vulnerable leadership that Black men in professional and corporate settings might use? David, we'll start with you.
So, look, I think you kind of hit on a key point there with ambiguity. I mean, this is the topic du jour in Silicon Valley these days, admittedly. But I mean, we live in just this increasingly complicated and complex world that is interconnected and that is being driven by powerful technological changes, frankly, the ramifications of which we do not understand or we do not well understand. And so, the challenges of the 21st century will require all of us to engage with problems where we won't understand all the contours, frankly. We won't understand all the data that is being used to crunch and analyze the problem. We won't, frankly, always understand the outcomes. And I know I'm in my own space at the moment when I think about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, but these will increasingly become parts of our world. And we will have a whole new relationship to technology and to certain industries where we are sort of observing effects and trying to understand them rather than having a detailed knowledge of sort of cause and effect. So that's a little bit of a wonky way to say, like, I think the vulnerability part comes in with understanding that there's no way you're going to have all the answers. There's just no way, right? Things are now too complicated. And this is hard. Like, this is a hard transition. I mean, I've been at Google for 7 years. My team has grown from when I started like 10 people to 175 today. Like, I can't keep when I was early in my days, I could kind of keep a lot of things in my head, and that made me feel more comfortable. I felt like I knew everything. I could go from 50,000 feet to 50 feet because I had a good handle on the surface area. There's no way I can do that today. That's the complexity, the scope of the problems, the size of the team. And so I think we all have to be comfortable with the fact that, like, we're just not going to have all the answers. The good thing is no one is going to have all the answers. So if that's the question, if that's the issue, then your leadership model does change to one. I like Damon's part about improving. It becomes your focus is more on continuing to ask challenging questions, continuing to sort of get the right engagement from folks, continuing to think about ways in which you can make incremental steps towards progress, and kind of direct and steer conversations versus come in and say, okay, folks, like, this is what we have to do. But, it's kind of a squeeze play. Like, all of us have been taught for so long. Like, I mean, we've all heard the same thing. You got to work, twice as hard to get half as far. We got to be much better than everyone else to get twice as far. And that, for many of us, has been an unbelievable command of the subject matter. And I relied on that as a crutch when I was more junior. I mean, I got it sounds egotistical. I'm not saying I knew more than everyone else, but I liked the fact that I could sort of hold my own in subject matter areas and not get pushed around. Letting that go and embracing this new model, and it's particularly important as you rise up the ranks, is going to cause some, cognitive dissonance, but it's important.
Okay, great. That's very insightful and instructive. So Damon, what do you think some of the more valuable, more useful, definitions of vulnerable leadership for Black men today?
David said, because it really speaks to the environment where things are changing. And David knows more than me, but just the amount of data that we produce on a daily basis is more than all the data produced from the beginning of time until 2006. Like, that's what we're doing on a daily basis. Like, there's just no way it's changing so fast. I think when you look definitionally, when you think about the definition of strength, is really about, right? I like to think about strength and flexibility. And if you think about, another sports analogy, the way the guys used to train, say the NFL players used to train in the 70s, it was all powerlifting. They didn't do no flexibility. They didn't really do anything about diet, none of that stuff. Look at what dudes are doing now. They're doing yoga. They're doing Pilates and weights and cardio. They're trying to, they're doing stuff that they're doing to kind of train themselves. And in the corporate athlete sense as well, that we need to be strong, meaning we need to know our stuff cold, but you also need that's a whole different skill set, a whole different way of thinking. Like, no one predicted that we were going to move 40,000 employees and run an insurance. I think it's just an essential skill is flexibility.
Okay, fantastic. This has been a very rich and thought-provoking discussion. We've got a little bit over 5 minutes left. So what I want to do now is just kind of turn our attention to what I would call landing the plane, right? So let's help with some strategies and tactics to put these principles of vulnerable leadership into practice, how to operationalize these definitions. So Damien, we'll start with you. What specific and observable behaviors can Black men use in corporate and professional settings to use vulnerable leadership to advance their careers and deliver for their organizations?
Yeah, great question. To get people to really want to invest in you, you have to for them to want to invest in you at the level that we need to be invested in to get ahead and move forward. Get feedback about yourself. The brand you have. So feedback's important. There's vulnerability there, just being open to feedback. Ask a lot of questions. I think it's important to ask questions. Sometimes we think if we ask, we won't, it'll show that we don't know something. Well, yeah, that's kind of the point. But also, we all know these brilliant Morpheus brothers who ask these questions that are just illuminating to everybody. I try to be like that. Important. My last thing I'll say is, get a squad. Like, you need a squad of brothers, sisters, people. Some of my mentors don't look like me, and they're part of my squad. And I can trust them. I can ask them questions. They can provide perspective. Especially when you're in a room and you're the only, or you're very few. Sometimes, this over-indexing on strong translates into being unapproachable. Somebody that people can relate to, it garners that investment that we all need to move forward and to get ahead. So I would say share, get feedback.
Yeah, Damon, I think those are powerful. And, just to highlight here, and actually David mentioned this earlier as well, asking those powerful questions. And that's something that I'm also a student of those brothers, Damon, and it's advice and counsel that I give to others, and I say that, he or she who asks the most powerful questions controls the game.
Absolutely.
Right? But it takes work. Right? It takes work. It takes a lot of thought and consideration and doing homework, right? To really ask the questions that matter in a discussion, right? So David, love your thoughts. So as brothers are thinking about how to land the plane, and what should they be doing tomorrow and next week and next month to really put these vulnerable leadership practices into play in their organization, what would you advise?
Sure. So I can think of four things, and I'll sort of riff a little bit off of what Damon just said. Sort of, I guess, point number one. I want to echo what Damon said about sharing personal stories. I got to tell you, this is not something that comes like super naturally to me. I don't know if it's Gen X or something else, but it's taken me a little while to sort of, as we say at Google, bring my authentic self to work. Which always makes me laugh. And to share all these personal stories. But I will tell you that, I had a long conversation with a very senior person at Google, and SVP, as just part of my own leadership, sort of one-on-ones. And we both remarked about how we didn't like to do that, but how powerful it was. And I started, and he did as well, funnily enough, I started sending out this Sunday night email to my entire team, which is just like, hey, what I'm thinking about. Here's what I thought about last week. Here's what I'm thinking about this week. Here's some of the challenges. Intersperse that with some personal stories. Oh, my kids did this. This happened to me. And it's just amazing to me how deeply that has resonated with the team. I mean, in a way that I would not, frankly, have anticipated. Sometimes I'm like, really? This is important to everyone? I know how that sounds. But I think, indexing harder on what Damon said, on kind of sharing yourself a little bit more, does yield dividends. And I will confess to have been surprised by that. I would say the second thing is, in the context of, I was saying this before about taking more chances. And I think the low tax way to do that is to ask more questions to when you're in meetings with folks. and I'm not saying you have to raise your hand and volunteer for some sort of, suicide mission, but when you are in meetings, a nice way to engage, a nice show leadership, a nice way to get out of your comfort zone is to think about like the really probative questions you can ask and challenge everyone. And I've seen that work well, and it can get people out of their comfort zone if they're in it, and it can also add to the conversation. So you can kind of combine two skills. I would say third, this is going to sound kind of funny, but I would be an active promoter of DEI initiatives and Black plus folks in your company. And, to get like super real, like in the past, like sometimes, if you were like the only Black executive, you didn't necessarily want to be leading the charge because everybody always assumed you'd be leading the charge. It's funny, sort of quick war story. Like I get these random things on LinkedIn from people saying, we want to talk to you about being our chief diversity officer. I'll say, that just shows me your company is not serious about diversity because I'm not even remotely skilled in that area. I've tried to be an active promoter at Google because I actually think it not only helps people, but I think it shows some strength. I actually think, I know we're talking about vulnerability, but I think in a funny way, it shows strength to say like, hey, listen, these are important initiatives. These Black folks need to be supported and elevated. They're super talented. I'm not going to shy away from that. Like I'm their booster. Finally, and maybe the last thing I'll say is like, we all have to do this. Everybody who's listening to this session has had a significant amount of professional success in their career. So they have developed their own styles and methods and approaches to things that have worked really well for them. And it should be acknowledged and appreciated. I think the biggest challenge is as you rise through the ranks, like as the saying goes, what got you there will not get you, what got you here will not get you there. That's what I'm trying to say. And so just being like cognizant of like where maybe what you've done in the past will not necessarily work as well for you. Like for me, I'm a lawyer by training. I was a litigator before. When I thought about all these Google sessions about being active listeners, I used to joke with people like, as a litigator, I wasn't so much trained to listen to you to figure out, what's really motivating you. I was trained to listen to you to find seams or weaknesses in your argument that I could then exploit and shred. I was like, that's what I'm supposed to do. That's not a great mindset in the corporate environment. You're not supposed to destroy your opponents. Because that doesn't end up working well for you. And so, I had to make a little bit of a mind shift, like, remember, dial that part of my personality down. This is how you need to engage. So my only point is like, listen, the skills that it's not that you have to abandon those skills that are powerful for you. And they've obviously resulted in a lot of success, but just understand how you have to meet the moment. And maybe sometimes I like to do like, it's a funny check-in, like every couple of weeks, it's like a check-in, like what do I think I'm doing well? What do I think I need to work on? Like, how did I feel about this last meeting or set of meetings I was in? Did I kind of come across the way I wanted to come across? God, it seems touchy-feely. And it's hard for a New York lawyer like myself to sort of even say these things, but it really does help. And it really does help in the corporate environment. Okay. That's my.
Okay. Well, David and Damon, that's powerful. And I'm sure, these are practical and these are powerful. And I think it's given the participants today a lot to work with. And so I would encourage the participants to think about taking one or two of the things that you've heard today and put it into practice, right? I think that's where the growth and the results come from. So and they've got a great group of things to choose from. We're just about out of time here. So what I'm going to do, gentlemen, if you would, I'm going to ask each of you, we were going to turn the table a little bit. We've talked a lot about what Black men in the corporate and professional setting can do to really, understand vulnerable leadership, put it into practice, be very practical about it. What is it that you think companies can do to really encourage leadership practices? We're not going to have a lot of time to talk about this, but if you've got your top two things, if you could just share those, then we're going to wrap it. So what are the top two things you think companies could do to encourage the vulnerable leadership practices we've talked about here today? Either of you can start.
Maybe two things. The unconscious bias training that I think companies do, I think is pretty good. I wasn't always a fan of it, but I think I've come around on it because at least it it increases awareness of the labels and the terms that people use to describe other folks. And I think that just raising that awareness is helpful. I've seen that helpful in our own sort of performance review processes, where we literally have people in those meetings that we call, bias busters. Silicon Valley, we like our labels. But it's actually really helpful in those meetings to have somebody say, hey, you just used the term, hypothetical, you just used the term bossy to describe Jane. Like, is that really, let's unpack that a little bit. Are you sure that that's how you want to refer to somebody like that? Like, what does that mean? And so I think actually encouraging companies to
Can you guys hear me?
An element of this as part of their performance reviews is important. Hey, Damon, can hear you now.
Hey, Damon, can you hear us okay?
Damon may be having some technical challenges. I know Damon, so this is my opportunity to say that he just agrees with me completely, and thinks everything I've said is spot on.
Okay. Well, I think those are powerful as well. Damon, if you can hear us, if not, can you hear us, Damon? Okay. Well, I think those very, very powerful recommendations for companies who are really trying to understand how to help support Black men as we, continue to grow in our corporate and professional careers and in leadership roles. And so with that, please join me in thanking our incredible panelists, David Graff from Google and Damon Hart from Liberty Mutual. I think this has been a very thought-provocative yet practical session that I think will help Black men as we think about how to continue to grow and advance in our careers, and particularly in leadership, as we incorporate vulnerable leadership even more so into our tool of tricks, if you will, to be successful in corporate environments. So thank you, and thank you, ELC.
Thanks, folks.